Hi, Catherine. Always so good to see you.
Hi, Kathryn. Nice to see you too. Thank you for the invitation and having me here today.
Yeah, I'm a guest podcaster today. My relationship with Awaken is I'm Christy Byerly's sister and supporter of Awaken Coaching, and just finished my training with Awaken Coaching too. So it's really an honor to be here. Um, would you like to introduce your
Yeah,
connection with Awaken?
yes, thank you. Well, I've been part of the Awaken community where I host a monthly story circle since this year, April of 2024. And I'm currently in the all-in-one coach training program. And just it's been a fantastic, incredible experience. And being part of the community has been really enriching and rewarding. So I encourage people to check out both of them.
Great. Yeah, I know that whenever I've come to your story circles, I get so much out of it and it's just so much fun. So I'm really
Yeah,
happy to have a chance to hear what you have to say about it. You can tell us more about storytelling and why you love it, why it matters to you.
great. Thanks. Um, yeah, so I love story because it's it's a process and it's a practice and it involves a listener and a teller and there's such a reciprocity between it. And so the process of telling and listening and sharing a story, um, great stories told well with a good intent can really change the world. They can change the way we see ourselves. Um, they can be healing, they can be transformative, and they can be connecting and inspiring in all the best ways. So that's why I love story and why I think it matters. Because it's a way that humans use something that's creative and informative to understand the world and ourselves and our place in it. And when we change stories, we can change the world.
Oh
So I
yeah.
think it's just an incredible way to access wisdom and um, love and connection and values and to be connected with one another.
Yeah, very powerful.
Yeah.
And I love
Yeah.
that you use the word creative because all of us are creative. And I think sometimes we forget that part of ourselves.
We do. And story, story and storytelling and creativity, it's a birthright. It's something that we are wired to
Well,
do. And it's fascinating because we know we love story, right? However we get it, whether it's in a movie or whether it's in a conversation or whether it's we are recounting the events of our day, we're telling a story and sharing a story. Um, and science is backing us up on what story does in our brain. And uh, great stories can release dopamine, which is something that our brains love. Um, and great stories um, help us learn really easily. They hold our attention really easily. And they just do kind of open us up to the world in ways which we might not be expecting.
um, yeah, it makes me curious how you would define the word story.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when you go looking that up, kind of like it's a thing that has a beginning and a middle and an end. And, but it's really, um, I think it's both a noun and a verb because it's an action. It's something that's taking place. Um, so I see story as both a process and a practice and a tool that's meant to help us connect, um, and relate with other people.
Uh,
So I think I would define story as more than something that has a beginning, middle, and end, but really as a way of being. And when we are in practice with story and being intentional about story, because it's something that just comes so naturally and it's happening all the time, we might not even notice it. But when we start to bring a level of awareness and intention to it, we become aware of how we are engaging with our own story or how we are engaging with the stories that we're hearing and the effects that those are having on us. So I would encourage people to think of story as also practice that we can become more intentional about.
Uh-huh. And would you say some of the effect that story has on us would be connecting us to our emotions?
Oh, 100%. It's really interesting actually. I mean, just as part of your, I'm sure, listening to a story or watching a movie, you can feel scared. You can feel joyful. You can feel sad. And those are just really three basic emotions, right? And then you can feel all those emotions in between. Um, so when we connect story to our own creative process, which is what I really enjoy doing in our story circles, is that's sort of taking the seed that a story might have planted and allowing us to work with it in our own way. So then we are really getting more deeply into the messages that we are taking away from story. Um, and I'll say too that a creative response to story, it doesn't need to be um, a visual art. It could also be movement, or it could be music. It could be poetry, whatever sort of speak to you in your creative uh, endeavors. And it's really about the process and not the product. When you're kind of going back to think about a story that you've heard or a story that you have told yourself, even, what does that look like if I put it onto paper? What might that sound like if I sang it or created it into music or wrote a poem or any other way that you'd like to be creative? I know that, when we've done Story Circle together, you've even started with movement when you've heard story. And I think that's just such a beautiful way to kind of integrate and bring the different pieces of story and creativity together.
Yeah, I know for myself, that's definitely one of my favorite parts of the story circle is getting that creative response time. Because I think, we're such a head-centered culture. A lot of people might be tempted to let's talk about the story, let's discuss or analyze, and that creative response time really does connect to your emotions and how you personally are relating to the story in a much deeper way. So um that's always so much
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. And I think that's just one of the things that can help make it enlivening and enriching is that you do go back and re-experience things and revisit something. I like to um, start with my story and then let it rest, usually for a day, and then come back um, and maybe work with it the next day so that I've kind of integrated it a little bit more into like my mind or my heart center in a way, if you will.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that's just my personal, um, and obviously when we're doing this in the story circle, it's not something that we can do in that moment. But I know that I found as I'm preparing for the circle, I'm thinking days in advance and it's really growing with me. And, um, I think some of the stories that I like to work with are what I would call wisdom stories or are multicultural things like fairy tales or fables or trickster stories, myths and legends. Um, and funnily enough, stories that are often written for children, because they do come with inspiring illustrations and they are just accessible to people. So I think when people are looking for stories, sometimes they don't know where do I find a story? And Starting with your library is a great place to go, or starting with the place where you live and getting to know the the stories of your place, whether those are indigenous stories or stories of history, and the people, or the explanations for why things are in the area that you're in, a story behind that big tree that's in your backyard could be a story that you might even create for yourself. Um,
Uh,
so I think there's just stories abound around us. And I think just kind of finding them and playing with them and exploring them can be really enriching and connect us deeper to ourselves and the world around us.
mhm. Yeah, so I know you actually brought a story with you
Yeah,
today. Would you be willing to share that with us?
absolutely. So this story, it's called The Blind Man and the Elephant, and it's a parable. It originated in the ancient Indian subcontinent, and it's been widely diffused. And um, the story has actually been translated into a very famous poem, and Natalie Merchant even sang that poem on one of her albums. So it may be familiar to some of us. But the earliest versions of this parable are found in Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain texts dating back to 2,500 years ago. So it's
Wow.
a story that's been with us for a long time. Um, Long ago, 6 men lived in a village in India. Each was born blind. The other villagers loved the men and kept them away from harm. Since the men could not see the world for themselves, they had to imagine many of its wonders. They listened carefully to the stories told by travelers to learn what they could about life outside the village. The men were curious about many of the stories they heard, but they were most curious about elephants. They were told that elephants could trample forests, carry huge burdens, and frighten young and old with their loud trumpet calls. But they also knew that the Raja's daughter rode an elephant when she traveled. Would the Raja let his daughter get near such a dangerous creature? The men argued day and night about elephants. An elephant must be a powerful giant, claimed the first blind man. He had heard stories about elephants being used to clear forests and build roads. No, you must be wrong, argued the third blind man. An elephant must be graceful and gentle if a princess is to ride on its back. You're wrong. I've heard that an elephant can pierce a man's heart with its terrible horns, said the third blind man. Please, said the fourth blind man, you are all mistaken. An elephant is nothing more than a large sort of cow. You know how people exaggerate. I am sure that an elephant is something magical, said the fifth blind man. That would explain why the Raja's daughter can travel safely throughout the kingdom. I don't believe elephants exist at all, declared the sixth blind man. I think we are victims of a joke. Finally, the villagers grew tired of all the arguments, and they arranged for the curious men to visit the palace of the Raja to learn the truth about elephants. A young boy from their village was selected to guide the men on their journey. The smallest man put his hand on the boy's shoulder. The second man put his hand on his friend's shoulder, and so on until all 6 men were ready to walk behind the boy who would lead them to the Raja's magnificent palace. When they reached the palace, they were greeted by an old friend from their village who worked as a gardener on the palace grounds. Their friend led them to a courtyard. There stood an elephant. The blind man stepped forward to touch the creature that was the subject of so many arguments. The first man reached out and touched the side of the huge animal. An elephant is smooth and solid like a wall, he declared. It must be very powerful. The second man put his hand on the elephant's limber trunk. An elephant is like a giant snake, he announced. The third man felt the elephant's pointed tusk. I was right, he decided. This creature is sharp and deadly as a spear. The fourth man touched one of the elephant's 4 legs. What we have here, he said, is an extremely large cow. The fifth man felt the elephant's giant ear. I believe an elephant is like a huge fan, or maybe a magic carpet that can fly over mountains and treetops, he said. The sixth man gave a tug on the elephant's coarse tail. This was nothing more than a piece of old rope. Dangerous indeed, he scoffed. The gardener led his friends to the shade of a tree. Sit here and rest for the long journey home, he said. I will bring you some water to drink. While they waited, the 6 men talked about the elephant. An elephant is like a wall, said the first man. Surely we can finally agree on that. A wall? An elephant is a giant snake, answered the second man. It's a spear, I tell you, insisted the third. I'm certain it's a giant cow, said the fourth. Magic carpet, there is no doubt, said the fifth. Don't you see, pleaded the 6th man, someone used a rope to trip up. Their argument continued, and their shouts grew louder and louder. Wall, snake, spear, cow, carpet, rope. Stop shouting, called a very loud voice. It was the Rajah, awakened from his nap by the noisy argument. How can each of you be so certain you are right? Asked the ruler. The 6 men considered the question. And then, knowing the Rajah to be a very wise man, they decided to say nothing at all. The elephant is a very large animal, said the Rajah kindly. Each man touched only one part. Perhaps, if you put the parts together, you will see the truth. Now let me finish my nap in peace. When their friend returned to the garden with the cool water, the 6 men rested quietly in the shade, thinking about what the Rajah said. He is right, said the first man. To learn the truth, we must put all the parts together. Let's discuss this on the journey home. Then the first man put his hand on the shoulder of the boy who will guide them home. The second man put a hand on his friend's shoulder, and so on until all 6 men were ready to travel together.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks for allowing me to share that one. I just find that so full of wisdom and just a fascinating way to take on some different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think you, go ahead.
No, please.
I think you were saying that that sometimes stories can show us a need to change a story that we've been holding onto for a long time, and this story certainly shows that.
Yes. And
The
how can we
ability to
have,
learn a new perspective from stories.
yeah. So I will share with you, I did a little art response to this one, and I'll share with you what I did. So I drew it with my eyes shut.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I would invite everybody to just try that. Try drawing something or experiencing something in the world with your eyes shut. And how is that? And what is that like?
Very different perspective.
Yeah. Um, so one of the other things that I find really interesting about story is uh, when a story is being told, the listener heartbeat will synchronize with the heartbeat of the teller.
Huh.
So not only are we connecting with our senses in terms of listening and maybe imagining, but we get that heart connection too. And I think that's why the best stories need to be told from a place of love,
Oh,
because they
that's
do have that.
really
They do have
fascinating.
that. They do have that power, and that's something that we see between mothers and babies. They have that, mothers and babies' heartbeats can synchronize, and you can also see that between romantic partners that heartbeats can synchronize. So this is another time where it's just showing how, wired we are for this kind of connection,
Wow.
and how powerful it is. So I think, yeah, it's a wonderful subject to learn more, I do have a couple resources I'd love to just share. Um,
Sure.
yeah, so I mentioned that sort of exploring your local area for the stories in the history of the land that you are in um, can be a wonderful way to find stories. And then there are a couple people that are working that I've enjoyed. I've studied with a woman named Susan Caro. She has a book called Therapeutic Storytelling. She's focused on healing stories for children, and that can be a great resource. David Sewell McCann uh, offers a podcast called How the Story and a sort of a storytelling coursework called Restorative Storytelling. And that's just a way of bringing healing into communities through story, which I think is
Hmm.
incredibly powerful. I also really admire the work of Sharon Blackie. She's written many books. One of them, The Enchanted Life, she writes a blog on Substack and she has a website. She is really certainly deeply exploring the stories of her land, which is Northern Europe. But she kind of gives us some tools of how we might want to do that for ourselves. So those are a couple of resources. And then Joseph Bruchak is Indigenous American who's written a lot of story about, if you are in the North American continent looking for stories of this land, I would point you to him. And then finding the storytellers in your area or the story catchers in your area can be really fun because working with people directly can just be a great way to access things.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think when you're digging into the stories of your area, that can probably also connect you to maybe you're not personal ancestors, but the people who came before you from that area. So,
Absolutely. And, personal narrative can also really play into this. It can be a wonderful way to sort of explore the story of your own life and kind of understand it from, as we're adults and we look back at our childhood and the things that have influenced us. uh, we can kind of come into new understandings, right? Because as a child, you're making sense of the world through your eyes at the time. And then how do you make sense of that as an adult? So working through a personal narrative storytelling process can be really, I think, really enriching. And then it helps us think about where do we want to go, right? What do we want our future story to look like? And what do we need to put into place to help us get there? And I think that's one of the
uh,
things that I love about the things I'm learning with Awaken Coaching is that it is all about that. And it is all about what is the story that we want to create in the world for ourselves and the world around us. And how do we get there? How do we do it together? So I think it can
right,
be it can be incredibly powerful.
right. Yeah. And the story you shared with us today is so fascinating in terms of holding different perspectives. And that's something else that's really come up for me with the Awaken Coach training is being able to allow for different perspectives and to
Mhm.
put all of it together as parts of the whole. So I think that story is very aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I know I think I could just revisit that story so many times and take away just another, like the next layer and how does it apply, in different situations for me, especially as I'm working and connecting with other people.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
stories are so layered. Like you said in the beginning, it's not just beginning, middle, and end. There's more to it than
Yeah. Yeah.
meets the eye, and you can keep coming back to it.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. So you had talked about um, how in Awaken, you're becoming aware of what kind of world you would like to create and be a part of. And so we like to end the podcast with that question. So what is it for you? What kind of world would you like to be a part of and be
Yeah.
creating?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Well, I want to be part of a world that's built on systems and structures that support all beings in knowing and feeling their worth. And
Mm,
a world that's built on healthy relationships with ourselves, with other people, and with the earth, where we all feel that connection and where we know and feel our value just because we are already inherently worthy. And that's part of the
mm,
world. That's what I'd love to see in the world, and that's what I'd love to bring to the world.
beautiful. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sharing from your heart with us. And I love how you spoke of that heart connection that happens with storytelling. It's very beautiful. Is there anything else you wanted to say
No,
before we
just
end?
thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. And it's special to be here with you today because we've shared so many stories and art moments together this year. So thank you for being willing to have this conversation with me today. I appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun, and I hope a lot more people try out the story circle. I've gotten so much out of it, so I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks. I also get so much out of it and appreciate you being there. I appreciate the members of the Awakened community. Thank you again.
All right, hope to meet again.